always from that day one, my stance was, look, if you've stuffed up, admit it, and it doesn't get worse.
Because I was a little girl that grew up where there wasn't any role models, and you couldn't aspire to work as a professional athlete as a coach.
The three Aussie ladies, Eloise Wellings, Madeline Hills and Celia Sullivan, just waiting for Lineo Chaka of Lesotho to finish, more than 5 minutes behind the winner.
It just showed, I guess, the influence that we have as sports people and the power of humanity and the power of vulnerability, I guess.
If you and I put in the same amount of effort, we should get the same, expect the same sort of service or result. Just hasn't always been the case. There was lots of things that were silent barriers that I guess had us behind the start line that you didn't even realise at the time.
Welcome to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Our mission is to protect the integrity of sport and the health and welfare of those who participate in Australian sport.
Hello and welcome to Sport Integrity Australia's podcast Onside. I'm Tim Gavel. Well, Sport Integrity Australia opened on the 1st of July 2020. Our role is to provide advice and assistance to sports and stakeholders to ensure the integrity of sporting competitions and to protect the health of athletes in Australia. Sport Integrity Australia coordinates the national approach to matters relating to sports integrity in Australia with a view to achieving fair and honest sporting performances and outcomes, promoting positive conduct by athletes, administrators, officials, supporters and other stakeholders on and away from the sporting arena, and achieving a safe and fair and inclusive sporting environment at all levels. This highlight edition of Onside features some of our best interviews in the past 12 months. First up, Paralympian Michael Gallagher, who in his prime won 2 Paralympic gold medals and 10 world titles, but his career took a drastic turn in the lead up to the 2016 Rio Paralympic Games, when he tested positive to EPO and was subsequently banned for 4 years. Michael admits he crossed a dark line.
People have the right to feel strongly about certain people's decisions, but I think, if anything, my story and people meeting me in person and stuff probably makes doping seem a lot less black and white, that you can be a good person, an honest person, but head down the wrong way, or just understand that you start out by not being a decision. It's just more of a process, a curiosity, and it leads too far.
Which is what happened in your case, didn't it? Tell us about what led you to take EPO, because it's quite an interesting timeline in terms of depression, lack of motivation, I guess issues financially, all compounding to force you in your own mind to make the wrong decision.
Yeah, I guess if you combine a bit of depression, anger, alcohol, fighting with your spouse, financial troubles, all that sort of stuff, you feel like your back's to the wall and you want to just fix it yourself. So that being the case, it's not really a good mindset to make clear and correct decisions. It's a bit of I wouldn't say a trap, but it's it can just lead you to making poor choices with anger.
When you took EPO, reading a lot about your story, it almost gave you a little bit of a boost psychologically, didn't it? And you sort of entered a different space for a short time there, didn't you?
Well, yeah, definitely, because I'd been already competing for 12 years, 13 years, and gradually, improving heaps at the start, then you're gradually improving for a few years. You always look for ways to get better training methods, better recovery methods, and for the 2 years, I guess, leading into Rio, I wasn't going to get any better. I felt that I had done everything physically, sacrifice-wise. I guess cheating was something new. It was it's going to give me the motivation to go out and hurt myself to a new level. you just got a feeling of this is new and fresh again after a few years of not having any shown improvements or thinking of any other ways to, you're already sleeping in an altitude tent each night. You got your diet down pat for the past 4 years. It did give me motivation to train probably harder than, as hard as I ever did.
I said you in the intro that your world came crashing down, but to a certain degree, I sense it was almost a relief when you got caught.
I guess it wasn't a relief to get caught, but it was probably, I don't know whether it was a bit of self-sabotage to, I don't know, looking back, it's probably the only way I would ever see myself getting out of sport. I was so passionate about it. That was my only identity. That's, I was a world champ and felt, like I had such a great status in that community and stuff. I would never want to retire, even though my finances was shot. Marriage wasn't going well. Yeah, there's no future in it when you're getting to close to 40, and I would just be in denial for years and years trying to make the team. And I guess the fact that I had to sever all ties made me, I had to move on.
The mere fact that you've come out so publicly, you went on Facebook pretty quickly to say, listen, I crossed the line, you admitted your guilt. Do you feel as though, people are more accepting of your story now and time has healed to a certain degree and you feel better for it?
You were in a bit of denial, but you wake up and realise, no, that is true, that I have done that. So always from that day one, my stance was, look, if you've stuffed up, admit it, and it doesn't get worse. It's bad enough as it is. So I owned it pretty early. It didn't recover from it straight away. It took a long time, but a lot of self-reflecting and getting stronger as a person mentally and different goals and stuff. Definitely in a much better place than I was as an athlete. Not an insecure person that can ride a bike really fast, needing everyone else's approval to do so.
It's a very powerful message. Michael also discussed the effect his sanction had on his family, friends and sporting community. Michael is a member of the Athlete Advisory Group at Sport Integrity Australia and continues to share his story to educate others.
You're listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia.
Carrie Graf, who is regarded as one of Australia's greatest ever basketball coaches, winning 7 titles in the WNBL. She also coached the Opals to bronze at the 2012 London Olympic Games and was the first female head coach in the WNBA in America. On Onside, she discusses the issue of equality in women's sports in an interview also featuring Australian squash legend Heather McKay and UC Capitals basketball player Keely Froling. Firstly, though, here's Carrie.
I think there's been a spotlight on women's sport over the last few years, particularly with the inclusion of AFLW, cricket. The Big Bash was huge in Melbourne with 80,000 plus fans. There's certainly been massive movement forward, but I still think there's a massive ways to go. You look around the country, and I think out of about 100 CEOs of national sporting organisations, there's 4 women. In the high performance coaching area, the numbers haven't shifted hugely at all, and there's still a massive gender pay gap in women's sport, and I think the needle hasn't shifted on some of those things. Yes, there's been some great movement in, there's now AFL, like I said, AFLW. There's Super Rugby for women. There's NRLW. So there's we've got more competitions for women to compete in, but that's just the start of it. They're new competitions where some of them, the salaries are pretty low if there is salaries, and there still isn't big television deals for women's sport, and I think that'll be one of the next big shifts. When do broadcasters not just support but put women's sport on television and pay for it and back it, and know that people will tune in and watch, people will pay to watch women play sport on television.
So what needs to happen to force change?
We still need a shift in the the decisions around who's going to support financially women's sport, and also how people value a return on investment. Is it just commercial, or is there a social element to your return on investment, whether that's through sponsorship or broadcast? And I think a shift in the thinking of what is a return on investment rather than just commercial and eyeballs is something that critically needs to be looked at.
It's been your goal, hasn't it, your dream, to have fully professional women's sport in Australia across all sports?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think because I was a little girl that grew up where there wasn't any role models, and you couldn't aspire to work as a professional athlete as a coach. And I was fortunate to have a professional coaching career for 20 plus years. So I think we're certainly seeing a shift that little girls can look on television and look around the media and go, wow, I could do that for a job, and that is a legitimate job. But I still think there's a long way to go.
From the highlight reel segment, we also spoke to Australian athletes Madeline Hills and Eloise Wellings, who committed a powerful act of sportsmanship at the 2018 Commonwealth Games by waiting for Leona Chaka at the finish line of the 10,000 metre race. Chaka completed the last 3 laps on her own. It was deemed to be the defining moment of the 2018 Commonwealth Games.
I think the aftermath of that race surprised me and continues to. In the moment, Eloise, Celia and I certainly didn't, think it was something that was going to be captured or that was going to stay in the memory of so many people. And to be honest, the day after, I was almost a bit overwhelmed and a bit uncomfortable with the response. And it's only been in the time that's passed I've realised what impact it did have, and how, our performances as individuals, wasn't what was going to be remembered. So, it continues to amaze me, the impact it has, but I'm very honoured to be a part of it.
What about you, Eloise? What's your reaction after a few years now since the 2018 Commonwealth Games? Are you surprised that it still resonates?
Yeah, I am. I mean, it was such a spur of the moment thing, and that's something that I guess was, resonated with the Australian public. And it was, I guess I was overwhelmed by it too. I thought, I was actually a bit worried about how Linnea was going to respond to all the attention about, whether it felt weird for her to have all that attention. But I was really privileged to catch up with her in the village the next day, and the first thing she said to me was, thank you for waiting for me. And I got back to my room and let the tears fall because I did not have to finish the race alone. And that really moved me. And I think it was a moment that I guess reminded me that it's not all about winning.
Well, let's hear the highlight, and as we go back to listen exactly what happened on that day.
5 on the Gold Coast, and sometimes the great moments in sport don't come from the winners, but have a look at that. The 3 Aussie ladies, Eloise Wellings, Madeline Hills and Celia Sullivan, just waiting for Leona Chaka of Lesotho to finish, more than 5 minutes behind the winner, Stella Chisang of Uganda. That is what sport is all about, supporting the competitors once you have finished.
Yes, and I guess, Madeline, you were quoted after the race saying that, I'd like to think if I had that day there'd be somebody standing on the track for me. That's part of it, isn't it? You're supporting somebody and you'd like that reciprocated, I guess, if you were in the same position.
Absolutely. And similar to what Eloise was saying, it was, I think when we reflect on it, you realise how much bigger sport is. It's an individual sport that we do. You sort of go out onto the track and you think you're all alone when you're out there. And in some aspects, I suppose you are. You're out there running by yourself, but you start to see how many people are running along with you. And that includes your own immediate support. Obviously, we realise, and, it's such a privilege when you put on the green and gold to know it's Australia as well, but it is also your competitors. And I think it's a good time for us to reflect, but for other people to see too that, you're trying to get the most out of yourself, but also from other people. And we've all had that day. Elsie had it, that day where she didn't get to have the run that she was hoping for. And I had it only a few days later in the 5,000 metres. And I think, in that moment, sometimes you can feel very isolated. Running around a track 25 times by yourself when you're having a tough day you feel very exposed. And so, I'd love to think that there'd be people there, and there absolutely have been people for me, whether it's a training session or a run or, aspects of life that are off the track. My time will come where people might wait for me in a similar way. And, it was something that we didn't think about. But, I think it was just really incredible that it was captured the way it was.
Eloise, is it fair to say there is quite a strong bond amongst the distance runners that doesn't probably exist in some of the other fields?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's this mutual respect of how hard our sport is, and it's not to lower any other sports, but our event, especially distance running, it can be quite a lonely and solitary journey at times. And I think when we all get together in the Australian colours, there's definitely a camaraderie and a mutual respect and a mutual celebration of actually just getting to the starting line. We do a high impact sport, and the injuries, and my injury journey has been quite significant. So I think just getting to the starting line and respecting each other's journey along the way and celebrating each other I think it's an important part of performing well as well, as working as a team and cheering each other on.
Madeline and Eloise also reflected on the aftermath of their act of sportsmanship, the power of sport, and we find out what they're up to now. Finally, during the peak of the Black Lives Matter issue, we featured an interview with Indigenous sporting pioneer Katrina Fanning. Katrina, a proud Wiradjuri woman and member of the Athlete Advisory Group here at Sport Integrity Australia, played for Australia in the first ever Women's Rugby League Test match in 1995. She went on to play 26 Test matches for Australia, but outside of footy, she's contributed so much to the community. We began by talking about her upbringing.
There's in a little town like that, that sense of belonging and community is really strong. But of course, you're either in that or you're not. And I'm sure there was probably a few kids growing up that didn't get to experience that. I played in the school band, did all sorts of things because I just really liked being involved. Some of those things, like I was terrible at band, but they put up with me. But it was just good to try things and you don't know what you're going to be good at unless you give it a fair go. So I was really lucky to get lots of those different opportunities.
Katrina also talks about the racism she encountered growing up in a small country town. There was a couple of kids that in my year at school that would think it was funny. There was one guy for the first 3 years of high school that asked me if my sandwich had coon cheese on it every day. It took me a year to realise what he was even talking about because it wasn't something that came up too often. Probably only really saw it harshly a couple of times, and usually around Laurie playing for Junie as well. And because he was so good at rugby league, that was what people... Laurie Daly.
Yeah. So that's what people defaulted to, was to use racism to try and bring him down because he was scoring 10 tries a game and those sort of things. So that was really the only place that I saw it as a kid. But growing up, and looking back now, things like mum and her siblings, the year before I was born, 1972, was the final year in New South Wales where it was actually law that if someone in town didn't want Aboriginal kids enrolled in the school, they couldn't be. So there was lots of things that were silent barriers that I guess had us behind the start line that you didn't even realise at the time. So you're going through school, and my mum's engagement with school was pretty limited. Because it was just not something or a place that she felt embraced through her own childhood and things. And I guess there was a bit of not wanting to be embarrassed by not understanding the homework or being able to do the canteen roster and those sort of things. So that played out in sort of disengaging from it rather than being embarrassed by it.
At the time, the Black Lives Matter movement was making a big impact around the world. Katrina reflects on the challenges ahead.
It certainly brings back lots of emotions. Our family directly haven't had someone who's died in custody, but certainly those sorts of... when those things happen, it affects a much broader group of people, and knowing that at any given time the way you're going to be treated in police custody, within a government service system or by a policy is different to other people and not in a good way, certainly does hang over your head. The constant, we were more likely to be told to, make sure you dress properly to go down the street, or the welfare will get you, or, that was probably more of the narrative for us growing up. But it was certainly that you had to be better, look cleaner than anybody else, just to not draw attention to yourself, because it always felt like there was someone watching.
It's not just about police custody, etc. We're talking a whole equality issues here, aren't we?
That's right. The whole if you and I put in the same man effort, we should get the same, expect the same sort of service or result, just hasn't always been the case. Probably my generation, and luckily the town I grew up in, that was a much easier road than it has been for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and that can be quite a difficult conversation to have at times. But I like to think that whilst my experience wasn't perfect, it certainly is a lot further along the way to the Australia I aspire for us to have, that I want our communities to be, and it proves that it is possible with goodwill, and certainly sport played a big role in that. It didn't hurt that all of Mum and her siblings were great at sport, and that the town, that was a really easy way to start to build relationships once they were allowed to come and live in town.
She represented her country in the first ever Women's Rugby League Test match in 1995. It's only now that Katrina realises the significance.
Getting that green and gold jumper, and I thought a lot about my grandparents, my extended family, about sacrifice and things. And that day at Lidcombe Oval, after a fair spray from Tommy Rodonicus as a warm-up speech, to be honest, I think the first 20 minutes, I didn't really feel anything except this, huge amount of adrenaline, and by then you're into sort of the arm wrestle of the game, and it sort of eases into just feeling like a game again. But that first game was pretty special. I think only a few days ago we went past the 25 years for that anniversary, so doesn't feel like it's been that long though.
So did you feel as though, listen, I am doing something special here because I'm a woman, Indigenous? There are many aspects to this, aren't there?
Look, at the time it doesn't feel like that, because at the time each one of those steps is a battle. The first time we got to go on live TV, all the commentators wanted to ask us about was really inappropriate questions about how we might strap body parts and things. So I don't think it's until probably about 2/3 of the way through my career when some of that support started to change, and people's opinion around the game of women playing rugby league started to change. Up until then, the next step's just the next challenge. Whether it's raising enough money to be able to play, whether it's addressing sort of stereotypes or any of the things that went into to raising the bar each time. I don't think there was ever a time I thought, this is really special, we're doing something new here. It was more the questions of why aren't we able to do this, and finding solutions to it. And I don't think it was until once I stopped playing that I guess you can relax from that, and you feel like, I did the best I could with the opportunities that were in front of us. And it's probably why since I finished playing I've been as involved in administration and other things, and advocating particularly for the women's game and for Indigenous community pathways, because I know how special the game is and the difference it can make.
The full interview also talks about the issue of racism within sports and the role sport plays in reducing barriers and social acceptance, coming to terms with her sexuality and her role as an Indigenous champion and Australian women's sports pioneer. Onside is a Sport Integrity Australia podcast which examines the issues that affect sport, helps answer your questions and educate sports and athletes to help to ensure the protection and integrity of sporting competitions in Australia are maintained. Onside can be found on all platforms.
You've been listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Send in your podcast questions or suggestions to media@sportintegrity.gov.au. For more information on Sport Integrity Australia, please visit our website www.sportintegrity.gov.au or check out our Clean Sport app.